relaxed again, back to his old self. Once they reached the curb, Denny stopped short and snapped his fingers. "Hang on, I left my wallet on the counter. I'll be right back." "I'll get it," Mitch said, but Denny put a hand out to stop him. "Bad idea, Mitchie. You saw your mom's face just now. Don't want to make her cry all over again, do you?" "I guess not," Mitch said. "Of course you don't. Now just sit tight in the car and don't come inside. I'll be back before you know it."
I was spending as many hours at the house as I could, including all of my desk time. Between Kyle Craig, the Patriot snipers, and these new homicides with the numbers, my attic office was as stuffed with case materials as it had ever been. That meant a lot of crime scene photos, so I told the kids that Dad's office was off limits for the time being, which explained the phone call I got from Janny that afternoon. "Hello, Alex. This is Janelle, the Banished, calling from the faraway land of the second floor." My daughter's always been one to put the smart in Smart Alec. I just try to keep up. "Hail thee well, Janelle. How goes it in the nether regions?" "You have a visitor, Daddy," she said, back to business. "There's a man named Mr. Siegel at the front door. He's an FBI agent." At first, I thought I'd heard wrong. What could Max Siegel be doing at my house? The last time we'd tangled had been the worst so far. "Daddy?" "I'm coming right down," I said. When I got to the second floor, Johnny was still waiting there. She trailed after me down the stairs, but I told her to stay inside. Then I closed the front door behind me on the way out. Siegel was on the front steps, looking very Brooklyn in jeans and a black motorcycle jacket. He also had a black helmet in one hand and a brown paper bag in the other. One of our security guys, David Brandenburg, had positioned himself on the stoop between Max and the door. "It's fine, David," I said. "I know him." We both waited for David to go back to his car before either of us spoke. "What are you doing here, Max?" Siegel came up another step, just far enough to hand me the bag. Right away, I could see on his face that something had changed.
"I wasn't sure what you liked."
I pulled out a fifth of Johnny Walker Black. Some kind of peace offering, I supposed. But with Siegel, I really didn't know what to think. He shrugged.
I know. Agent Schizo, right?"
"Something like that."
"Listen, Alex, I realize what I'm like to work with. I take all this shit very personally. I shouldn't, but I do. I'm passionate as hell. Maybe it's part of what makes me good at my job. But I can also be a real asshole sometimes."
I wanted to say, sometimes, but I just listened to what Siegel had to tell me.
"Anyway, I just came by to say I know you got your hands full these days, and if there's anything you need, you should let me know. Anything at the Bureau or even just security backup here at the house, someone to pull in overnight or whatever."
He looked at my blank face and finally smiled.
"Really? No tricks, no bullshit?"
I wanted to believe Siegel. It certainly would have made things easier, but my instinct was still to distrust him. I couldn't just shake that off because he came over with a peace offering. Then the door opened behind me and suddenly Bree was there. "Everything okay out here?" she asked. Siegel chuckled.
"I guess my reputation precedes me."
"Actually, we've got a teenage news service sitting on the stairs inside," Bree said. She put out her hand, ever the peacemaker. "I'm Bree Stone."
"Detective Stone, of course. Good to meet you. I'm Max Siegel, Alex's nightmare from the Bureau. We occasionally see things a little differently."
"So I've heard," she said, and they both laughed. It was a little surreal, actually. This was a side of Siegel I'd never seen before, the friendly, interested in anyone but himself side, and it seemed to have come out of nowhere. "Max was just dropping this off," I said, showing her the bottle of scotch.
"Right."
Siegel took a step down toward the sidewalk.
"So anyway, mission accomplished. Nice to meet you, Detective."
"Stay for a quick drink," she said, and gave my hand a squeeze. "It's the afternoon. I'm sure we could all stand to wind down a little." There was no pretense here. We all knew what she was trying to do. Siegel looked up at me and shrugged. This was my call, and honestly, I would have liked to have said no, but that seemed as if it could just create more trouble than it was worth. "Come on in," I said, and led the way. "Mi casa es su casa, Max." Inside, Janny had fallen back as far as the kitchen table. Nana and Ali were there too in the middle of a game of Go Fish. It was Ali's latest obsession these days, but they all stopped and looked up as we came in. "Max, this is everyone. Regina, Janny, Ali. This is Agent Siegel." Ali's eyes bugged out at the motorcycle helmet, and Siegel put it down in front of him.
Go ahead, little guy. Try it on if you want to.
It's fine, I said to Ali. I took out some glasses and ice and a couple of smart waters for the kids. Nana went to open the cabinet where we keep the chips and crackers, but I shook my head no, just enough for her to see.
You got a nice place here.
Siegel looked out the window at the backyard.
Great setup in the middle of the city.
Thanks. I handed him a short pour of the scotch and then one for Bree and myself, and one with water for Nana. So here's to fresh starts, Bree said pointedly, and raised her glass. Here's to summer coming, Ali chimed in. Siegel smiled down at him and put a hand on his shoulder.
And here's to this good family. It's really nice to meet you all.
Sometimes the breaks in a murder case come out of the blue, like a phone call on a Sunday morning from somewhere you'd never expected. Detective Cross? Yes. This is Detective Scott Cohen from Brick Township PD in New Jersey. I think we may have a line on your sniper problem up here. I turned my newspaper sideways and started writing in the margin next to the crossword, Cohen, Brick Township. Go ahead, I said. Yesterday afternoon, we pulled a white 92 Suburban out of the water over at Turnmill Pond near here. The plates were already gone, no surprise. But I don't think whoever put it there expected us to find it, at least not this fast. The thing was, we had an ultralight air show going on at the airport this weekend, and a couple of guys flying over saw something down there and called it in. Yes, I said. Cohen seemed to talk without taking any breath at all. Yes, so it couldn't have been in the water for more than 48 hours, I'm thinking, because we still managed to pull some damn good prints off of it. 6 of them had a dozen or more points each, which is great in theory, until none of them came up on my first pass through IAFIS. Detective, I'm sorry, but can you explain to me how this connects to my case? Well, this is the thing. I'm thinking we got a dead end here, too. But then this morning I get a call from the state. Apparently, one of those 6 prints is a match for your unsub down there. Now, we were getting somewhere. I stood up off the couch and started toward the attic, double time. I needed my charts and notes right away. Unsub stands for Unknown Subject, which was the only designation we had for our phantom gunman. The print he'd left behind on the night of the first sniper hit, and then again at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, had been deliberate, like a calling card. This new print sounded a lot more like a mistake to me, and at this point in the game, I loved a good mistake. I wondered whether all of the remaining prints from the car belonged to the same guy, or if maybe we'd just gotten a line on both members of our sniper team. That thought I kept to myself for the time being. Detective Cohen from Brick Township, you may have just made my month. Can you send me everything you have? I asked. Give me your email, he said. They're all scanned and ready to go. We've got 6 full prints, like I said, plus another 9 partials. It was really just a lucky break that we found that vehicle so fast. Here's my email, I said, and spit it out for him. Sorry to rush you, but I'm a little eager to see what you've got. No problem. I heard typing in the background. Okay, they're on their way. If you need anything else or want to come take a look around or whatever, you should just let me know. I will, I said. In fact, I'd already mapped out the route to Brick Township, New Jersey on my laptop while he was talking. If this turned out to be what it seemed, I'd be meeting Detective Cohen face to face before the day was out, and he and I would be taking a look around, or whatever. The limitation on these new prints from New Jersey was that I had nothing to compare them to. No criminal records, anyway. Accordingly, there was no way to know whether they'd all come off the same person or not. I thought about Max Siegel's offer of help the other day. With the Bureau's resources, he probably could have gotten further with these than Detective Scott Cohen had, but I just wasn't ready to jump in there. Instead, I put in another request with my Army CID contact in Lagos, Carl Freelander. Better to go with a known quantity, I figured, even if he was halfway around the world and maybe getting sick of my calls. Twice in 1 month, Alex, we're going to have to get you one of those punch cards, he said. Tell me what I can do for you people. Meanwhile, I owe you another drink, I told him. And for what it's worth, I may just be chasing the same ghost as the last time, but I need to be sure. I've got 6 more prints I want to run through the civil database, maybe all from the same person, and maybe not. Cohen had been right about the quality of the prints. MPD's standard is 13 points, meaning anywhere a ridge or line ends or intersects with another ridge or line. If 2 prints line up in 13 or more of those places, it's a statistical match, and I had half a dozen viable scans to work with. Carl told me to send them along and leave my line open for an hour or so. True to his word, he called me back 50 minutes later. Well, it's a good news, bad news kind of thing, he said. 2 of the 6 prints you sent me came up military. You got the left index and middle fingers on a guy named Stephen Hennessy, U.S. Army Special Forces, Operational Detachment Delta from 1989 to 2002. Delta Force? There's a red flag, I said. Yeah, the guy saw action in Panama, Desert Storm, Somalia, and get this, he ran long gun training for ground forces in Kunduz. Sounds a hell of a lot like a sniper to me. I felt as if my slot machine had just come up bar. We'd almost certainly just found our second gunman, and this one had a name. What about a last known address? I said. Do we know where Hennessy is now? Yeah, that's the bad news, Carl said. Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky. Hennessy's been dead for years, Alex. The 3.5-hour drive to New Jersey flew by, probably because my mind was running the whole time. Maybe someone was buried down there in Louisville, but I was willing to bet that it wasn't the real Stephen Hennessy, not with his prints on that Suburban. The question was, who had Hennessy become in the last several years? Also, where was he now? And what were he and this phantom partner of his doing in New Jersey? My plan was to meet Detective Cohen at Turnmill Pond, where the car had been pulled out of the water. I wanted to catch that scene while there was still daylight, then follow him back to the impoundment lot to see the vehicle itself. But when I called Cohen to tell him I was almost there, he didn't pick up. The same thing happened when I got to the meeting point at the south end of the pond. I was pissed, but there was nothing to do now except get out and take a look around. Turn Mill was one of several bodies of water in the Collier's Mills Wildlife Management Area, which encompassed thousands of acres. From this spot, all I could see were trees, water, and the dirt road I'd just driven in on. Plenty of privacy for dumping a car, anyway. The ground at the edge of the waterfront was heavily rutted and tamped down, presumably where the police had pulled the Suburban out. It looked to me as though the vehicle had been pushed into the water from the edge of the wooden bridge where the pond narrowed into a channel. Looking down from above, one would assume the water was plenty deep enough, but it obviously wasn't. In any case, it wasn't the kind of thing you could undo. Once I'd taken all of that in, I headed back to my car. I figured it couldn't be too hard to find the police station in town, but that's when I saw a cruiser coming up the road, fast. It sped along the pond a ways, curved into the woods, and then came back out again. It stopped right behind where I'd parked. A uniformed officer, a blonde woman, got out and waved as I came over. Detective Cross, that's me. I'm Officer Guadagno. Detective Cohen asked me to drive out here and bring you back as quickly as possible. There's been a homicide in town, a woman by the name of Bernice Talley. I assume she just meant that Cohen had been pulled away from my case. Do we need someone else to let us into the impoundment lot, or can you do that for me? I asked Guadagno. No, she said, you don't understand. Cohen wants you to come to the scene. He thinks Mrs. Talley's murder may be related. To the Suburban? I said. To my sniper case? The cop fiddled with the brim of her hat. She seemed a little nervous. Maybe both, she said. It's nothing conclusive, but this same woman's husband was found shot dead 2 years ago, right over there. She pointed to a patch of woods about 100 feet up the shore. The ME called it a hunting accident at the time, but nobody ever came forward. Cohen figures whoever dumped that Suburban didn't just stumble onto this place, and frankly, we don't get too many homicides around here. He's naming the son, Mitchell Talley, as a person of interest in all of it, both deaths. She stopped then, her hand on the open car door, and looked at me more directly than before. Detective, this may be none of my business, but do you think this guy could be your shooter down in Washington? I've been following the case since it broke. I demurred. Let me go take a look at that scene before I say anything, I told her. But in fact, the answer to her question was yes. The police vehicles in front of Bernice Talley's home were too deep when we got there. They had a tape line around the house while the neighbors watched from the fringes. I had no doubt that all of them would be locking their doors and windows that night and for many nights to come. My escort officer walked me inside and introduced me to Detective Scott Cohen, who seemed to be running the show. He was a tall, barrel-chested guy with a shiny bald head that caught the light as he talked. And talked. Just like on the phone, he briefed me with a long but mostly informative monologue. Mrs. Talley had been found dead on her kitchen floor by the boy who mowed her lawn every Sunday. She'd been shot once at close range through the temple with what looked like a 9mm. They were still working on the time of death, but it was sometime within the last 72 hours. The woman was believed to have been living alone ever since the son, Mitchell, had moved out 2 years earlier,